Well, good day and welcome to AR and VR 101, a primer on the what, why, and how. I don't know about you, but I've sat through way too many of these tech presentations that go too fast, use too many buzzwords, and are just like a barrage of concepts flashing across the screen. So today we're going to break it down into simple terms and give you real life examples. We want to get your wheels turning so you can consider how you might apply this learning technology appropriately in your work to improve performance. I'm a big believer that as performance consultants, we absolutely must keep pace with technology so we know when it's the right solution and when it's the wrong solution. We don't need to be the programmers and work in the code, but we do need to know what the technology can do and when to use it. So I'm Lisa Toenniges, and I'm the owner and CEO for Innovative Learning Group. We're here in Michigan, and our elevator speech goes something like this. We create custom training and tools that help employees do their jobs more effectively. So with me today is Devon Merz.
Hi, everyone.
And Devon is our AR and VR development lead. So Devon has a degree in electrical and computer engineering. So Devon's going to answer all of the hard questions today. All right, so before we get started, we would love for you to chime in with the chat feature, any questions or comments you have. If any of you are not familiar with Zoom, this is located at the bottom of your screen. You may just need to scroll all the way down to make that feature visible. And then immediately following this webinar, we're going to email you a link with a short survey. As learning people, we certainly love to get your feedback. And then following this session, we're going to be recording it today, but we'll get you out the YouTube link next week along with the slide deck. So let's jump in. So today we're going to discuss what are AR and VR and why would we want to use them? We'll also talk about some common use cases. We're going to look at the most used hardware and software development tools. We'll discuss necessary skills that you need. And finally, we'll take a look at a roadmap for getting started. Now, this session is going to be a great overview of AR and VR, but to really get it, you're going to need to experience it yourself. So either, grab a headset, especially for VR, that you maybe have in your personal life, or try to use something that you have at work. Or if you're near us in Michigan or plan to be in the state for a visit, come by our office so you can actually put on the headset and try it out. All right, we want to do a quick poll question, and you can type your answer in chat, but we want to learn a little bit about who's in our audience today. So if we ask you, what are AR and VR? Would you say A, I don't have the faintest idea? B, I can say a few words about them, but not much more. C, I'm pretty knowledgeable about them, but I don't have much hands-on experience. D, I've worked on small projects. Or E, I'm an expert and could be giving this presentation. And if that's true, go ahead and turn on your mic and get talking. All right, we've got a B, a C, another B. Okay, so people just kind of getting going with this technology. Oh, a couple C's, excellent. I'll be looking to hear your comments throughout. Please chime in as you go. Excellent. Okay. And let's go to our next poll question. Same thing, you can type in a letter. I want to understand a little bit more about your organization. So does your organization use AR and or VR? So A, not at all. B, we've been discussing but not taken any action. C, we're identifying concrete use cases. D, we're developing a pilot. Or finally, E, these are technologies that are an integral part of our blended learning offerings. No E's yet. Okay. People just getting started. All right. The use cases is, I think, key. So if you're already at letter C, that's just terrific. So as we go through the rest of the presentation, what we're going to do is we're going to alternate between AR and VR. So we're going to define what's AR, then we're going to define what's VR, etc. So if we say, what is augmented reality or AR? So AR is looking through a device to add information. It's like adding a layer of information. Now, with AR, you're still aware of your surroundings. You're present in the room and you're using some type of device to enhance your understanding of the situation. You're essentially supplementing the real world with digital information through a visual interface. So if we look on the screen in the upper left corner, imagine that that's your hand holding your smartphone and you're in your living room. And what you're trying to do here is you're trying to see if you were to purchase that chair, what might that chair look like in your living room? So in other words, the chair is the overlay there, and the smartphone is helping you with that layer of information. If we go to the top right corner, what you're seeing here is some kind of engine or motor, and you're looking through a tablet. So here the device is your tablet, and what you're doing is you're getting another layer of information about that motor. And finally, at the bottom there, we see a medical professional. She seems to be looking at some type of X-ray, and she's getting an overlay or more supplemental information, if you will, about that X-ray. So with AR, it can really modify your perception, if you will. All right, so now if we contrast to AR and we say, well, what is virtual reality or VR? So with VR, you're wearing a headset that goes on your head, like you see on the screen, and you are completely transported to a different world. Here it looks like you're transported to New Zealand or the Hobbit or something, right? But probably in our work, you might be transported to a manufacturing plant, maybe a surgery room, maybe even inside a piece of equipment. It lets you look around in any direction. You can actually walk around, you can hear audio, you can talk, you can touch things. Now, once you're in that VR world, you are no longer in the space where you started. You completely lose sense of where you came from. It's like you've been transplanted and have the feeling like you've been taken to another place. So you're immersed in this new environment, and now this kind of becomes your new context, if you will. And we know in learning how important that context is. All right, so now as you see on the screen, with VR, you can use hand controls along with the headset. So these let you interact with objects. You can pick up objects, move them, manipulate them, and this helps engage the learner and really simulate real-world tasks. All right, so now we have a general idea about what these are. Let's talk about what they're good for. So AR, given that you can add a layer of information, as you see in the upper left corner, it's really good for performance support. Think in the flow. You're trying to do a task and you need some help. So an AR solution might be just what you need. Now, VR, on the other hand, is for skill building, like you see in the lower right corner. So you can actually simulate doing a task, you can move around, you can use your hands with those hand controls. So if we know AR helps with performance support or doing tasks in the flow, let's talk about a few possible uses. So in that first bullet there, one is when more information is needed in the flow of work. So imagine you're doing your onboarding at a new company and you walk into the corporate lobby and you see a giant portrait of the founder on the wall and you think, it'd be sure nice to get some more information. You could hold up your device and add a layer of information, maybe about the company history or perhaps the biography of that founder. In the second bullet, AR is good when providing options is not convenient. Imagine a dealership showroom that might have cars or trucks. And imagine that the vehicle on display is a black SUV. And you've kind of been thinking about getting a white SUV and maybe the sport wheels. You can actually, perhaps the salesperson has a tablet. You can hold up the tablet, add another layer of information, and perhaps see what that exact same vehicle looks like in white with the sport tires. And finally, in that third bullet, AR is good when hands-free operation is needed. So imagine if you're a technician and you need to do some repair work on an elevator. Perhaps you could have on Google Glasses and or a different type of glasses, right? And it could be prompting you with the procedures for repairing that elevator. All right, so that's AR. If we want to talk about good uses of VR then, the first bullet, one is when work conditions are dangerous. So here you might think about, flying a plane. All right, this is high stakes. And using something like VR will help the learner alleviate the fear of making a mistake. In that second bullet, VR is also good when recreation of a scenario is expensive. So perhaps you have a very, very large piece of equipment on the other side of the globe for your company, but that same type of equipment is coming to your location soon or locations around the world. You might want to get people up to speed on that equipment in advance. So instead of, flying everybody around the globe to practice that equipment, perhaps you could create a VR experience. In the third bullet then, VR is good when it's impossible to create the real world conditions. So here, think about something like, maybe you're getting people exposed to radiation. Maybe a first responder or active shooter kind of situation, or perhaps even battle in a war scenario. Those things are really hard to recreate. And finally, VR is good when the scenario is difficult for the learner to envision. How about this one where what's it like? What's the pill see if the pill is traveling through your body? If the pill were able to look around and see the inside of your body as it travels through it, what does that look like?
All right. So next, let's discuss good topic areas and industries where AR and VR can truly shine. So first, if we look at AR, you'll see that it's well suited to maintenance and repair, field services, medical training, product design, and safety. Now, if you look at VR, it's suited toward exploration, onboarding, sales and soft skills, equipment, orientation, and safety. And you'll notice that both technologies are beneficial for ensuring learner safety. And this is because these technologies both allow learners to simulate dangerous scenarios without actually posing any threat to the learner. And then for industries, we see that both AR and VR have use cases across these wide-ranging industries, from automotive and manufacturing to medtech and pharmaceuticals. But we remember that even though they span across these industries, it's different use cases within the industry. So next, let's talk about why you would use AR and VR. So starting with why you would use AR. The reason why is first, if you want to ensure standardized best practices. So if you want to make sure that the learnings at one facility are transported across all your different facilities. Second would be if you want to highlight different tasks. So if you want to highlight pressing a button or pulling a lever, AR would be helpful. And then lastly, does overlaying feedback help the user to perform the task? So for example, if you had a remote SME connecting in and able to see everything that the participant saw, would they be able to overlay feedback and information that could help the participant to perform the task at hand? If any of these are true, then AR might be the solution that you need. So next, if we look into VR, the emphasis is slightly different. So the first reason you use VR is that it helps with focus. And this is because you feel immersed in the training and it limits any potential distractions. Second is that it evokes emotions. So you feel very present in VR, and it activates the part of your brain responsible for these emotions, the amygdala. The amygdala helps to commit these skills to memory and really adds in any retention to the application at hand. And then lastly is that you can practice a lot and it leads to fluency. So you can do the training over and over multiple times, explore multiple solutions, and most importantly, be able to fail without risk because the learner is able to control both the pace and perspective of the learning. So now let's jump into a few use cases for these technologies. So first, we're going to learn about augmented reality and gaining more information about an object. And in this case, it's an exhibit from the Detroit Institute of Art. So this exhibit incorporates augmented reality features. And if you can see in this picture, what you do is you hold up your camera and it has an augmented reality app on it. And you can actually see within the sarcophagus and see the mummy inside and also see the bones. So a really interesting example of augmented reality. Our next example would be translating a sign and any text in that sign into a different language. So in this example, you have a parking sign and the text below is in a language that you're unable to read. But if you hold up the augmented reality camera and hold it up to the text, then it'll actually live translate to the language that you select, in this case, English, and then you're able to understand what the sign says. All right. And now, lastly, for augmented reality, this example would allow designers to create a mock-up of a building and be able to explore all of the different floors and do this all in their office and all on the table right in front of them.
So I think let's pause for a minute, and I want to give you time to, in the chat, answer either one or both of these questions. I'm curious first, for those of you that have actually been involved in an AR project, if you could share a little bit of that. So go ahead and start typing if any of you have an example where you've actually been involved in an AR project. And then I guess the other thing to think about is maybe you haven't been involved in a project, but now that we've, 15, 20 minutes into it here and your wheels are turning, what AR might be a good use at your organization? Anything come to mind that might be a good use of AR? We never want to use technology for the wrong reason just because it's new. We want to use it because there's a good use at your organization. So I'll just pause for a minute and see if folks have some things to share. If not, we'll go ahead. I want to give you a couple minutes to see if any of you actually have examples of AR now, either things you're using now or things you can imagine using in your organization. Or maybe it's just too new and you're just soaking it in right now. All right, if you're still typing, go ahead. I am going to keep going and we're going to switch gears now and talk about some VR use cases. So the lowest level of virtual reality is called 360-degree video. So this is when you put on the headset and you can look around literally 360 degrees, just like you're standing in an actual location. So maybe you're standing in Paris and you're actually looking around and you can see the Eiffel Tower and you keep spinning and then you can see your favorite bakery and baguettes. So you literally can look all around you. Now, in this example, we see an airplane factory. But again, this could be the scenario where you're, again, onboarding perhaps, and you're at the company headquarters. And part of onboarding is to get this virtual tour here of kind of being at the airplane factory. So you can imagine instead of seeing this factory here, maybe you're taking a virtual tour of, say, a retail store or a distribution center or even a plant, perhaps. So let me pause because I see we caught up with a few AR. So let's let's look at these. We have one example where this would work well for lockout, tagout procedures on the manufacturer floor. Absolutely, to get those kind of step-by-step of the procedure as some type of overlay. Excellent. And then Lauren says, I could imagine, okay, VR being an application for operations, cash handling training for our team members located far from our training location. So to prevent travel time. Yep. So thinking about maybe kind of the physical operation about using a POS perhaps and doing that cash handling. If I have that a little bit wrong, Lauren, let me know. Meanwhile, though, let's go kind of to another VR use case, and this we call interactive 360-degree video. So this is where participants can make decisions in the same environment that they'd be doing their work. So here you can see this is a retail setting. And what we're trying to get is that the participants can identify untidy areas, all right? So it might be, it's actually, anything that's wrong in a store. Maybe it is an untidy area, like you see in the upper left. Maybe there's no staff in a given area. Maybe there's an open drawer. Maybe there's staff ignoring a customer. Maybe there's garments that are not removed from the dressing room. So you could make decisions and identify all those rule violations. And then as you see in the right side of the screen, it gives you, your score at the end, how well you do. It looks like this person got 5 out of 5. So way to go. All right, so in the next example here, we call this, immersive virtual environment. So here in this scenario, we have a doctor that's learning to use this new piece of equipment on the screen. And same scenario where the equipment's not readily available yet. But it's different than the current tools the doctor uses. So of course there needs to be some training and a whole lot of practice, right, before we use it in the real world. And the other thing is it's manufacturer specific. So it does need to be custom because it's specific to using that tool or piece of equipment. All right, we have another kind of immersive virtual example here. So what you see on the screen is a clean room. So here what we're after is for the operators to practice using this same equipment and be in the same environment that they will be on the job. So if you know anything about clean rooms, you need to move a certain way, communicate a certain way, operate the equipment a certain way, because this helps you maintain appropriate sterilization so you don't have contamination, right? We have another VR use case. You see here on the screen, here we have a firefighter or a first responder. And in this scenario, the person is learning to use the hose. Now, you could probably do this in a parking lot, right, on a sunny day at the fire station. But imagine how differently it will feel if it's dark. You'll get that feeling, it'll be intense. And remember how Devon talked about evoking emotions, right? So by learning how to use this hose, it's going to feel more like recreating that stressful environment of an actual fire. Now, with VR, just like with e-learning, for example, it can be off the shelf or it can be custom. So there actually are off the shelf examples of the steps of being a first responder for fires. But say this hose was manufacturer specific, or there were some things that were different about, this region or location, then you might need something that's custom. All right, we have another example here. What you see on the screen now, these are gas meters, and gas meters come in all types of configurations and have all different kinds of defects on them. So for gas meter safety inspection training, VR might work really nicely because the people needing to do this inspection could experience different configurations. You could randomize it. You could have different configurations, different defects with this meters. So all the things, they could get tested on, all the things that they might encounter in the real world.
So the next use case that we have on VR is around recruiting. So in this example, we have someone and they're about to start a job where they climb to high altitudes. Now, what they can do is before they start the job, they put on the VR headset and are able to actually experience the job at high altitudes as part of the recruiting process and see whether they want to join the company. The next example we have for VR is in training salespeople. So if you have a product that's not in one singular place, and it would be very expensive to transport the salespeople to different locations around the world, then what you can do instead is recreate this piece of equipment in virtual reality. And not just recreate the look of the equipment, but also some of the functionality, some of the ability to, press the buttons on the equipment, pull levers, turn dials, be able to actually operate that piece of equipment in the virtual environment. The next VR example is operating equipment, and in this case, specifically driving a forklift. Now, when you're operating this, there likely would be a standardized safety procedure that would be, common across all forklifts. But if there are manufacturer-specific irregularities or, anything specific about the forklift, this would be where you would want custom training. And this would allow you to have training that's specific to the manufacturer's forklift. And then this next example for VR would be on an offshore platform. So if you're on an oil and gas platform and you recreate this scenario, you can do it all without the danger of actually being out in the middle of the ocean and without being able to or having to, get in a helicopter and transport yourself from the shore to the middle of the ocean, which could also be quite a danger.
All right, so Devon's from Houston, so he's actually been on a rig like this. Was it terrifying?
Yeah. Being out in the middle of the ocean can be quite confusing the first time. So yeah, recreating this in VR, and I actually have done a VR offshore platform experience. It's a really great way to better understand kind of your daily procedure. All right, so for this last example, it would be if you're a doctor or a medical professional and you're delivering a complicated and interesting message to a patient. Then what you might want to do is practice it in virtual reality, be able to have this kind of conversation, and experience all these, conversational best practices beforehand.
But I think, what Devon's talking about is the opportunity to practice soft skills there, where you're delivering kind of a tough message to a client or a patient here. And VR is a good use of that.
Yeah, because if you're able to learn those conversational best practices in VR, then when you're actually in that real world scenario, you can replicate those learnings and perform them in real life.
So this is a good time. Let's pause, and I'm sure you've maybe seen the example that Michael put, where he's sharing that at Chrysler, they used it with a virtual production line where they had employees, with goggles and with gloves, and they grab a virtual part as it moved down the line so they could quickly, it was almost like a prototype. It sounds like they could prototype the equipment and try it out and see if they needed to modify the line or if it was good as is. So super good. So besides for training, this technology can also be used for, product development, or here it's like kind of equipment development. So we're going to take just a pause here. So I would love for you to type in any other examples you have of virtual reality, and then just any questions that you have in general right now that have come up. Lauren says, are there any cost planning tools to help understand what an investment in AR and VR would look like? Yeah, and we get asked that question all the time, all right? And really, it's a huge range. And I'm sure that doesn't surprise you because many of you know that even for e-learning, there's a huge range. But with virtual reality, I mean, we looked at that 360-degree video. I mean, those can be very reasonably priced. I mean, that can be $3,000, $5,000 for a 360-degree experience. You can certainly do a 5-minute experience that could be $40,000, $50,000, right? And you could certainly spend millions. So it's a very big range. Obviously, it's going to depend on, what are you really simulating? What is your kind of the setting that you're in, or how many settings that you're in? Perhaps how many things, kind of different scenarios that you have to create for people to practice. And it's all about the movements. So how complicated are those movements? But I'm glad you asked that, Lauren, because it's always kind of the elephant in the room, how much these things cost. All right, excellent. Well, Devon's going to go on now and talk a little bit about AR hardware.
Yeah. Yeah, so next let's go through the different possibilities for hardware within augmented reality. So the first would be if you're using a smartphone. So what a smartphone will do with AR is you can use your camera to record the outside environment, and then it'll actually project this digital layer on top of it. Next, if we look at a tablet, it's very similar to a smartphone. It has that same camera on the back recording the outside environment, but the tablet will just give you, more space to interact with and more space to view. So next, if we look at AR specific glasses and headset, like we see in the bottom right, so this could be like your Microsoft HoloLens 2. So essentially, you're able to see through those lenses and see the outside environment, but with a panel or information projected on top. In this case, it'd be a system check for an engine or a motor. And then lastly, in the bottom left, we have a mixed AR VR headset. So this would be like your Meta Quest Pro. And this allows you to have all the functionalities of your basic VR, but additionally have the abilities of augmented reality by having cameras on the outside of the headset that can see your outside environment and project it back onto the lenses of the headset. All right. So next we have our VR hardware. So if we're looking at VR hardware, we have a few different possibilities. In the bottom left, we have our tethered headset. Now, with a tethered headset, the downside to this is that you have a wire coming out of, the back of your headset on the back of your head, and it needs to be attached to a high-powered computer. And then also, if you see in that picture in the bottom left, you also have these base stations. And so those are the, cubes you see on the wall that have cameras that are actually able to track your position in 3D. And so it has a lot of setup, and it's quite kind of bulky. But the benefit that a tethered headset can provide is that it has the highest level of graphics and performance. Now, if we look at kind of the background image at the top, so she would be wearing a standalone headset. Standalone headsets are great because they're mobile, they're transportable, but they just don't have the same graphical fidelity that a tethered headset can provide. And then lastly, we have a laptop or desktop. So this would be if you have your main person in the experience in the headset, but then you have a secondary person that's able to view the experience from the laptop or desktop. And it's essentially just like they were in the same experience that the person in VR is, but they just don't have that same level of immersion that the VR headset and the 360 view could provide. All right. So next we're going to go on to the software components. So if we look at, different AR software kits, we have AR Kit, AR Core, and then ZapWorks. And so these are produced by, Google, Apple, and Zap AR. And if you want to produce AR via the web, you'd have to go with ZapWorks. But if you want kind of the highest quality software, you'd go with AR Kit or AR Core. So next, if we look at VR software, so here I'd like to make a distinction between our code-intensive software and our low-code and no-code solutions. So if we look at code-intensive software, you'll see game development engines like Unity and Unreal. In terms of deciding between the two, I'd say Unity is further along in terms of its VR, AR, MR, you know, extended reality capabilities. But the Unreal Engine, while not as mature in these areas, does provide a higher level of graphical fidelity. Mostly though for these kind of 2D games. So then, if we look at low code and no code solutions, these are great for producing maybe a pilot project. Don't have the same capabilities of a Unity or Unreal, but for a low code or no code solution, you'd want to go with software such as A-Frame or InstaVR.
All right, so before we jump into skills, let's take a look at the question we have, which is a good one, and it's not silly at all. Can you make it look like someone who doesn't have freckles does have freckles? And the answer is absolutely yes. I've seen examples where you can kind of do the same idea to see what it might look like if you have a tattoo on, your arm or your leg or something. So yes, you can do an overlay of a lot of different things. Yeah, virtual try-ons. Yeah, that's another good example. Jennifer, how might this coat look if I tried it on? Very good. All right, so if we want to get started with this, what skills do we need? I think often with this new technology, it's easy to just focus on the techie part or the programmer role. But I think this would be a terrible oversight, to just grab a programmer like Devon and get going. And I'm sure it comes as no surprise, certainly for this audience, that we need to do some upfront work. So we need a performance consultant. We need somebody that's going to think about what's the current current performance, what's the desired performance, and what's that gap in performance, and is it going to be filled by some kind of skill building solution or some kind of performance support solution? If the answer is yes, and you're going down that training and performance support path, you for sure are going to need an instructional designer. They're going to need to do that audience analysis, write good learning objectives, determine the best delivery method or that blend of delivery method. So with AR and VR, you need very detailed design documents and storyboards. You don't just jump right to building the thing. And finally, in some of those examples, you saw there was text on the screen. So certainly we need that text to be edited by a professional editor. So, for those of you that have done e-learning, you think e-learning has a lot of detail? Whew. VR takes it to a new level, certainly. But Devon, what
Yep.
about these other roles?
Yeah, so next we have the graphic designer and 3D modeler. So this role helps to create the visual elements of the experience, and they can create stuff like 2D and 3D assets, images, animations, and all other visual elements that really, bring the experience to life and help make the experience engaging and effective for learners. Next, we have the programmer, and the programmer helps to create the software and code of the experience, both some of the upfront user interface as well as the backend data systems. And then lastly, we have the QA tester. And the QA tester makes sure that there are no bugs in the experience, that there are no hiccups, and that any of the code is running well to make sure that the experience is smooth for the learner.
And so certainly with all those roles, right, we're going to need a project manager who's looking across the project, worried about quality, schedule, budget, and how each of those different roles is involved and when each of those roles is involved with the task. All right, so you want to get started with AR and VR. We absolutely recommend first doing a strategy because as an organization, you want to first make some of those macro level decisions, about how you're going to approach this new delivery method before you just, again, jump in and start building one thing and you haven't even figured out the technology or who's doing it or how you're going to evaluate it. So if we look on the screen here, we believe these are the major components of that strategy. So first is vision. You want to look out, say, 2-3 years and say, okay, if we were going down this path, what would it look like? Who would be using this technology? How would it be being used? Kind of like paint a narrative picture if you were involved with this new technology. For audience and macro learning needs, it's thinking about, as an organization, do we have learning needs that make sense for these technologies? And then specifically, with the learning delivery methods, which delivery method makes sense based on your performance and learning objectives? And again, often, right, we know it's going to be a blend. It's not usually one thing. And especially with VR, you're not going to learn your whole job in a headset, right? So it's probably going to be a blend of solutions. When we say procurement, we mean then how are you going to obtain this learning experience? Are you going to buy it off the shelf? Are you going to work with a vendor like Innovative Learning Group and build it externally? Are you going to ramp up a team and build it internally? So it's thinking about how you're going to procure or get the learning. Devon, the technology?
Yep. So next, if we look at tech and infrastructure, you'll want to pay attention to three different components. So the hardware, the software, and the delivery method. And then most importantly, you'll want to make sure to collaborate with IT to make sure that any solution works with internal systems. And then next, if we look at assessment and evaluation. So earlier we talked about all the data that you could measure in VR. Well, after you collect this data and unearth the significance of the data, then you'll need to provide actionable feedback that the learner can really change their decisions and how they do the work based off of.
So for organizational structure, then, this really ties to some of those decisions you've made about procurement. Because if you're going to do it externally, you probably just need a project manager that's fairly tech savvy internally. But think if you were actually going to build VR internally, I mean, you're going to need programmers like Devon, but you're going to need instructional designers and graphic designers that understand this technology and how to design instructional strategies and whatnot for the technology. And finally, we know that every good strategy has an implementation plan, so it doesn't just sit on the shelf, right? You need to figure out what actions do you need to take, who's going to do them, what resources or money or time do you need to make that happen. And I think having a good implementation plan in place will also help you scale. So if you want to go down this path, we suggest doing this strategy first. So as we get to the end of our time together here, this table is really a nice summary of what we talked about today. So I'll leave this on the screen, but I'd love to hear now, again, as your wheels get turning, what additional ideas do you have about how you might apply this technology? And certainly we have time to take any questions. So go ahead and either put ideas in the chat or ask us a few more questions. This is your chance while you have, especially Devon here, a guru programmer. What questions might you have for him or me more on the instructional design and performance improvement side? Take a minute. Give you a chance to type here. We have some time. And if we don't know the answers to any hard questions, we'll certainly get them for you and send those out as well. Or perhaps we made at least this amount of information pretty crystal clear for today. Oh, good. Here's one from Lauren. So, has anyone had experience with dizziness issues with using VR?
Yep. Yeah, so that's something that we have heard that in previous experiences, sometimes people will say they've had dizziness or sickness. And I think one of the causes of that might be using an older headset. So if you're using one of, the older Vive Pro from back in 2016, maybe it would cause these issues. One thing that we do to help with any of these feelings of dizziness or sickness is that we both use the most up-to-date game development engine, Unity, to create our experiences, which makes sure that it's really smooth, has really high frame rate, so it really seems like you're in the environment, so you get rid of some of that sickness. And also, when we demo these experiences, we use the Meta Quest Pro, which is Meta's latest, highest end headset. And that also, with the technology in it, allows any participant in the experience to have, a lot smoother experience without a lot of the sickness or queasiness that people have previously felt in VR.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that because we certainly have heard that before, but I think it's a pretty small percentage when you follow Devon's recommendations. We have another good question here. Any general ideas about how long it takes? And again, this is kind of co-varies with the price, right? I mean, if you're doing a simple 360-degree video, it could be done in a couple weeks. If you're doing a multi-million-dollar solution, it's probably going to be months, if not a year or something to do that. So again, it's like a lot of things, if you create a good design document and good storyboards and good prototypes, which are all the same things you do with e-learning, you do those with creating this technology, you can get multiple teams going on things at the same time. So once you do your upfront design and prototyping, then you can have multiple teams working in parallel on the development. Really great question.
Yeah, and as your organization experiences more and more about VR, then you'll gain that organizational experience that'll allow you to produce these trainings more efficiently, distribute them more efficiently, and kind of know what you're looking for when you develop a VR experience.
Okay, now the wheels are really turning. I see this is good. Okay, so for companies with remote employees, are there more services for renting or borrowing headsets, or how else is deploying the solution managed if employees are not on site?
Hmm.
We're actually involved with some of that right now with a large global company.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about how is your company going to get headsets, we have some clients that purchase the headsets up front, but there also is the opportunity of renting or leasing these headsets, and that will decrease any of the upfront cost involved in purchasing this hardware. And so next, if you're looking at, remote solutions and if employees aren't on site, well, one of the great capabilities of virtual reality is that we can actually distribute these experiences anywhere across the world that's connected to the internet. So as long as your headset has access to Wi-Fi, then we can, upload and update to the latest version of the experience so that your global workforce can all, train on the same material.
We've been talking about onboarding, right? It may not be that many years until, if you're a remote worker, you get a box at your front door, and as part of your onboarding kit, there's a headset there, and you start in on your learning. These are good. Any other final questions? Feel free to type them in. Yep, you're welcome. We've put our contact information here on the screen. We've got, I have a Twitter handle. We've also got a Friends of Innovative Learning Group LinkedIn group we'd love for you to be part of and share our information there and also participate in different discussions. And again, we'll be sending out the recording of this next week along with the slides, but certainly feel free to connect with us, and we'd love to keep the conversation going and certainly answering any questions. But I think really so important here is to think about the right use cases, because with a new technology, we want to make sure we get to a right use case and get the right people in our organizations involved. And so those first solutions that we're creating are really great ones and ones that make an impact in your company. So thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to keeping in touch. Have a great week.
Thanks, everyone.